All right, so welcome to the IDinsight team, which includes former and current members who have worked on this 4-year impact evaluation of the Village Enterprise Program. So today is October 14th, 2021, and we'll be revealing the results of the evaluation. Nobody on the call knows what the results are going to be. We're all going to find out together, looking at the data together. So just a brief summary of the project. So Village Enterprise runs a poverty graduation program in Kenya and Uganda. And for the program that we evaluated, Village Enterprise rolled out their intervention to about 14,000, 15,000 households spread across 241 villages. And they did this in cohort style, so for 7 cohorts from 2018 to 2020. And then we, IDinsight, designed an RCT to evaluate this program, and we randomized at the village level. So we have data from the 241 treatment villages and from the similar 241 control villages. The primary outcomes that we looked at in the evaluation were household consumption and assets. And we collected data earlier this year from about June to August 2021 from each of those 482 treatment and control villages from a random sample of about 20 eligible households per village. And so in doing this, June through August, we got data for households about 6 months to 2.5 years after they concluded the program, depending on which cohort they were in. So for the past, since we finished data collection in August, for the past 6 weeks or so, we've been cleaning and analyzing the data, but we thought that it would be fun, as a team to learn the results of the evaluation together. So, typically in these evaluations, you have whoever is cleaning and handling the data, they'll usually find out the results before everyone else. And it'll usually be they start to get a hint of it as they do some early cleaning and then finalize the analysis. But to prevent, us, Winnie, Miguel, Christy, and I from learning that as we were looking at the data, we simulated treatment assignment and created a new treatment variable, just a fake treatment variable, which we used for all of our model building and testing. So what we'll do on the call today is we'll actually switch out that fake treatment variable with the real one to see what the true results were, and then run the main analysis file in Stata. So we're going to go result by result. But before I reveal each result, we'll have a Zoom poll where I'm going to ask everyone to predict what they think that result is going to be. Then we'll look at the group's predictions and finally look at the actual result. And one other thing is, if you're comfortable, I'd ask people to be off mute, so audible when I reveal each result, and to make some kind of audible reaction to it. I think that would be just kind of more interesting than silence after each one. Okay, so for the first outcome, we're going to look at the primary outcome, monthly consumption. So before I show the result, I'm going to launch a poll for you to predict what you think the effect will be. And so I've benchmarked this with the effect size from the previous RCT of the Village Enterprise Program in Uganda. All right, I'll give another 10 seconds for any stragglers. All right, and now we'll share the results. Okay, hopefully you can see them on your screen now. So it looks like there's some variance in people's predictions. The most of you think that the effect size will be smaller than in the previous RCT. And then a few people think it'll be about the same size, and one person thinks it could be larger. So let us take a look. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So you should be able to see the do file, and I'm changing at the top of it the treatment variable from fake to real. So the first graph is going to show the treatment effect for household consumption, and it's on the graph you'll see 6 bars. So the first 2 are control and treatment means for the whole sample, and then the next 2 for Kenya, and the next 2 for Uganda only. And then above each pair of bars, you'll see an average treatment effect in US dollars, as well as treatment effect in standard deviations. And if anything statistically significant, you'll see some stars on that. All right, and yeah, come off mute so that we can hear your reaction. So let's see. All right.
Cool.
What?
Wow.
These are positive reactions.
So that's torture, right?
Yes.
Oh, in terms of USD.
Yes.
Sorry,
So
in terms of standard deviations is on the bottom, you said?
yeah. So we have USD above and standard deviations below in each box.
Wow.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I'm so relieved.
Yeah. So
wow.
we're seeing
This is
about
good.
a
This is
$10
cheap. Yeah.
difference in average monthly consumption between treatment and control
Yeah.
households.
We underestimated so much.
I know. What's interesting is it's like exactly the same in Uganda. So the previous RCT was only in Uganda, and the treatment effect for average monthly household consumption was $4 per month. So it's like the same
So
result
it
in
was-
Uganda.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even throughout COVID, it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I was worried about Kabi as
Yes.
well. That's what I was thinking, that it was going to be like about half of it. But wow, this is
Yeah, this is good.
This is good.
Yeah, very good.
Everyone can breathe.
I know.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions before we move on to assets?
I'm curious what's so different in Kenya. Well, they did the larger grants actually, so it's interesting.
Yes, that's a good point. That's a good point. So next we'll be showing the effect size for net assets. And for this one, I'll actually be benchmarking by the size of the initial grant. And as you mentioned, Christy, in Kenya, some households actually got a larger initial grant. So about 2/3 of households in Kenya got $150, whereas the other third got $50 at the beginning of the program. And then in Uganda, all treatment households got $50 each. So Village Enterprise was experimenting with this grant size, and we'll see the different results for the different grant sizes in a minute. But first, we'll look at the effect for net assets. Again, same graph design as for, oh, I'm sorry, before I show it, I have to do the poll. I'm gonna forget this every time because I'm so
Our
excited.
buyers have changed.
Exactly, yeah. So let's see what people think the effect on assets will be.
I feel like I'm more optimistic now.
Yeah, now we're
all
biased.
biased.
Sort of thinking. You should have done all the polls beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably would have given different results. All right, let's share these. All right, so it looks like 4 of you think it's going to be up to 50% of that initial grant amount, and that $80 is the average across all households because some got 50 and some got 150. All right, let's take a look. So as I mentioned, the graph for net assets is going to have the same design as consumption. So again, whole sample, Kenya, and then Uganda.
Is the one I'm most concerned about. So
Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, I think in the long term, the assets,
Yeah.
are more impactful.
Woohoo.
Yeah. Good for Kenya.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
Kenya is
not bad.
Yeah.
Wow. But
I mean,
Uganda
and
is
still
not
for Uganda,
good.
yeah, even though it's not significant, like, we do see like some positive. So
What had we anticipated about same as what had we anticipated?
So the mode guess was between 0 and 40, I think.
Okay.
40 being about half the size of the initial grant for the average household.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if it's more relevant to measure in terms of SDs. I think assets was like 0.12
Mhm.
from the previous RCT, and consumption was 0.07.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know what benchmark matters here.
Mhm. All right. Any
I was gonna ask that. So Jeff, do you remember, like, from the power calculations, what was like the amount in dollars for Uganda that we needed to be able to detect a significant effect?
I don't know in dollars. I think the power calculations were mainly done in terms of standard deviations, and at least for consumption, we were powered to detect 0.07 standard deviations at 70% power. That's what we thought, but we actually end up having more power than we expected. There's slightly less variance in the outcomes here, and I think also the power calculations were a little conservative and not accounting for business mentor fixed effects, which gives us significantly more power.
Yeah, I'm really wondering for Uganda, is it the grant size that makes this huge difference? Like there's a, yeah, I'd want to find out more about what's happening in Uganda.
Yeah, well, we'll see in the next result the difference between
Yeah.
households that got small versus large grants in Kenya. But yeah, I think there could be a bunch of possible explanations besides that.
Yeah, I also wonder what the timing of our data collection, what impact it might have in terms of especially consumption, maybe not assets, but
Yeah,
Yeah, because
sure.
like
in Uganda.
for these villages, like, I mean, if we talk about like $15 in assets, are we talking, is it like, it's something like meaningful, right? In a way, in terms of like just like the dollar amount, even if it's not significant.
Yeah, I mean, and compared to it's not precisely estimated, but compared to the initial grant amount of $50, if it's suggesting that about a third of that initial grant is still, like, households still have that, haven't spent it all down over the course of, almost 2.5 years for some households, that could be considered impressive. Great. Okay. So next we're going to turn to some subgroup analyses. So these were subgroups that were pre-specified in the pre-analysis plan, specifically because Village Enterprise was especially keen to know the impact for different subgroups, ideally to help them think about how to design the most impactful program going forward. So the first subgroup we're going to look at is for the size of the grant. So as we mentioned, the kind of default program is most participating households received $50 seed capital. But then in Kenya, Village Enterprise increased that amount to $150 for some households. And these were not randomly selected. So, we kind of have to take the difference that we see, if we see any, with a grain of salt. It could also reflect other differences between the groups that got 50 versus 150. So before we do that, we'll do a quick poll and see what you predict will be the difference for the treatment effects between the households that received the small grant versus the large one. All right, I'm going to share the results now. So some variance in guesses, but the most common one is that households that receive the larger grant will have moderately larger, but some think much larger, some think slightly larger. Nobody thinks the treatment effects will be the same. So let's see. going to comment out the first. Okay, so in this graph, we're going to see the effect for consumption and assets in the same visual. So there's going to be two panels. On the left, you'll see the effect for the consumption outcome, on the right for the assets outcome. And in each of those graphs, there will be 4 bars. The first 2 bars will show the control and treatment means for households that received small grants. And then the next 2 bars for the control and treatment means for the households that received the large grants. And at the top of each graph, you'll see the difference in the treatment effects for small versus large. It's still running, all right. All right, and this is for Kenya only because there were no large grants in Uganda.
Did we have, I mean, when during the design, did they have an expectation of what the difference would be?
I didn't have a guess. I was thinking that effect sizes might be larger for households that received larger grants. What we're seeing is that there's no significant difference in terms of consumption, but there is a significant difference for assets that households that received larger grants have significantly a larger effect on their net assets than households that receive small grants, which can make sense. I mean, if they still have some of that,
yeah, because like you would think that okay, you receive the grant, you make sure that you're able to, like, I don't know, for instance, during COVID, you're able to smooth out your consumption, and then the rest of the grant you invested into productive assets. So I think that it makes sense that for the households that receive a larger grant, they have like more assets. So
Jeff and the team, like very selfishly, we're doing a process evaluation for a cash transfer program here in Senegal, and I think they would love to see those results at some point. So I would like to know at which point in time we'll be able to share, if ever. Because they are typically they are giving very like small grants or like the small grants of VED, and they're expecting like assets to grow significantly out of those small grants, and we're trying to tell them that it's more likely that consumption will increase, but not necessarily assets. Anyway, I'd love to know when we could potentially share something like this externally.
Yeah, definitely. So welcome, Kassan. We're going to keep the results confidential until the working group releases them publicly, which will hopefully be by the end of November. So we need to deliver our draft report to the working group by November 1st, and then there's going to be 2 rounds of iteration, and then hopefully they'll be quick about releasing those, and then we can post this.
Okay, wonderful. So, wonderful. As long as like in December is fine for us. So great. Thank you.
Also, I don't know when you joined, Kassan, but did you get to see the initial results for consumption and assets, the main outcomes?
No.
Okay, they were positive. So for consumption, the effect size was more than twice as big as what was found in the previous RCT of Village Enterprise Program in Uganda. Though there was a big difference between Kenya and Uganda, the effect size is much bigger in Kenya than in Uganda. And then net assets, there was also a positive effect that was equal to about half the size of the initial cash transfer that treatment households received.
Okay.
So to bring you up to speed, we're all breathing a sigh of relief right now.
Thank you. It's pretty neat to see all of this now.
Yes. Okay, so the next result we're going to look at is we're going to look at the impact of the Village Enterprise Program by cohort. So as a reminder, Village Enterprise rolled this out in across 7 cohorts over the course of from early 2018, and then the last cohort finished their program at the beginning of 2021. So we don't have nearly as much precision to estimate the effect sizes by each cohort because it's a much smaller sample. And then, you can kind of make your prediction about how you think treatment effects might vary. Cohorts were not, households were not randomly, and villages were not randomly assigned to cohorts. So that's one thing to consider. And another is, of course, some cohorts finished the program much earlier than others, but we collected their data all at the same time. This in June through August this year. So before I show the result, we'll just ask for your predictions of which cohort you think has the largest treatment effect, and we'll focus on consumption in this poll. All right, I'm going to close it in 5 seconds. And take a look at the results. All right, not much consensus for which cohort people think will see the greatest impact. I guess the most people, 3, thought the most recent cohort. So this graph, because there are so many subgroups, I'm just going to show the treatment effect for each group. So it'll be a point estimate with a 95% confidence interval to give you some sense of significance, though, can't really rely on the eye test for comparing significance, but at least we can look at the different estimates. Just checking the code. And again, we'll see consumption on the left and assets on the right. Whoa.
Four.
Yeah. I don't know how villages were split between cohorts. Do you know, Christy or anyone, if like certain cohorts were heavily weighted in Uganda versus Kenya? Like I'm wondering if cohort 4 came more from Uganda.
Yeah.
And Jeff, this was only for the treatment villages, right?
This is showing the difference between treatment and control villages in each cohort. So
Okay.
every treatment village had a paired control village, and they're in the same cohort basically. But of course, only the treatment villages got the program.
Yeah.
Like, can we map this in time versus like what the pandemic?
We can. Yeah, I forget which
Sorry,
ones.
sorry, I'm just throwing work at you guys, but like no, just like it's.
Yeah, we definitely
Yeah.
can. We definitely can. I just don't know off the top of my head the timeline for each cohort exactly which ones finished the program before the pandemic.
I think 6 and 7 were the ones that were affected in terms of the cash transfers, if I'm remembering correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Were the ones that what, Christy?
I think 6 and 7 were the ones that their cash transfer got affected by COVID.
Mm-hmm.
They had to delay that because they weren't able to go out to the field in person.
Okay.
Yeah, I wonder if you could come up with a story about how like the early cohorts were able to establish their businesses before COVID, and so they had some ability to weather it, whereas maybe cohort 4 got hit right at the most vulnerable time for their businesses and couldn't really get them off the ground. I don't know,
but I mean, cohort 1 seems to be doing well on consumption, but quite poorly on net assets, and I would think it would be the opposite because they would have invested already way before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It's not clear what happened with cohort 4.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'll be good to see if it's the small grant one.
That's true. That'd be good to check too. Yeah, any other reactions or questions about this before we move to the next subgroup?
I have one more. Like, did VE change a little bit they were doing the program between the beginning and maybe cohort 2, or like fine tune some aspects of the program to encourage people to use the grants toward assets as opposed to consumption? Actually,
Maybe, yeah. Something to ask about for sure.
maybe not. Actually, maybe it makes no sense what I'm saying.
I think it might also be useful to indicate what the amounts for each of these were, just to help us come up with a narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, like what percentage of each one had larger grants? Yeah, definitely. Great. Okay, so moving on to the next subgroup. So another subgroup of interest was the looking at households by the gender of the head of household. So we're going to look at it'll be similar to the earlier grant size subgroup analysis, where we look at the difference for control and treatment households that have a male head of household versus a female head of household. But before we do that, we'll do a prediction.
Can I ask what your definition of headship was that you used?
Yeah, you can. Can someone answer that?
Sorry.
Maybe Wenny or someone who, was who wrote that into Survey CTO. Oh, sorry. Actually, this came from Village Enterprise's targeting exercise at baseline.
Yeah.
And this is just self-reported.
Self-reported, yeah. Yeah. Something else that we don't have right now, but along the same lines, be really interesting to see is the difference for businesses where Village Enterprise targeted a woman or a man in the household to receive the cash transfer. Well, we'll have to see if we can get that data. Okay, I'll stop the poll now and share the results. And yeah, no clear consensus, but it looks like the most people think female-headed households may have slightly or moderately larger treatment effects. 2/3 of you think that. So let's take a look.
Oh.
Reactions.
Yeah. Seems like the male are doing well.
Are they?
Yeah, it's not significant. I mean, it's pretty imprecisely estimated.
Yeah.
No surprises that male-headed households had a higher consumption to begin with. I'm just wondering, do we have this data by the grant size?
We can do that, and we can do that split. Yeah, I can't right now live, but we can do that split to look at. Yeah, you're saying, what's your hypothesis, Frida?
I mean, I'm surprised. I mean, the difference isn't that high. Well, I mean, among the assets, I think female-headed households did have a higher treatment effect. I just wonder, whether I would have expected a much higher effect among female-headed households. Just keen to see were they more likely to get smaller grants or whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't guess that would necessarily be driving it, just because when Village Enterprise gave out larger or smaller grants, they gave it to a whole village, like a whole village either received smaller grants or larger grants.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised that there will be a bigger effect on net assets among female-headed households than on consumption.
Why?
Yeah, it surprised me there.
I think women would tend to save for a rainy day, or I mean, invest as opposed to consume, and Anyway, yeah, that's my thinking. I'm not surprised.
Were the savings groups, were some of them just for women?
I want to say I'm not surprised, but I'm also impressed because these are they're poor, like as you were saying, Frida, they are poorer households. So saving in a poorer household is even more difficult. Putting it toward assets or growing your assets.
So that is
So I'm
another
very impressed.
split of the data that we can do. We can see among poorer versus wealthier female-headed households versus poorer versus wealthier male-headed households. Do that triple difference and see what we find there. Christy, you were describing, but I think you were on mute or we couldn't hear you.
Oh, I was saying, I don't think it's the case that they had separate savings groups for women, but a lot of their participants I had thought were women, but actually I don't know if we confirm that in the data. I remember hearing that anecdotally.
Yeah, I remember that from the design document that I think they were targeting nearly 3/4 of participants to be women. And we must have that, either they have that data or we already have that somewhere, and that would be, I think, really interesting to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
I think this could also be valuable for VE just in terms of their targeting. Like if they're looking to reach the poorest of the poor, maybe they want to include more female-headed households.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Could be a good proxy for poverty, in addition to the other indicators they use. All right, so the next subgroup, we have two more. The next one, we're going to be looking at the treatment effects by wealth quintile at baseline. So this data, the covariate data, it comes from Village Enterprise. They, as a recap, they conducted their targeting exercise in both treatment and control villages before we randomized. And so for every household, we know their poverty probability index. Used to be called progress out of poverty. Now it's kind of rebranded as their poverty probability index, which includes things like household basic assets, cows, bodas, phones, as well as things like how many members of the household there are, and I think what's the education level of the female head of household, as well as a few others. So before we look at the results, we are going to do a prediction for which quintile had the highest treatment effects. All right, 5 more seconds. All right, definitely no agreement here. Exact symmetry. Yeah, does anybody want to give their hypothesis before we look?
Maybe, I mean, I would say that the poorest one would have the largest impact on consumption because they are the ones that usually like would need to smooth out their consumption in like harsh periods and so forth. So, I mean, I think that the wealthiest ones, they already like have their consumption like figured out. So maybe they will invest more into assets. I mean, that's my hypothesis. I like to see that.
My thoughts exactly, Miguel.
Yeah. I second you. Let's see.
Does anybody want to take the opposite stance? I mean, 4 of you did, so.
About the poorest or the wealthiest? I missed what people were saying.
People were saying that those arguments were for the poorest quintile having the largest treatment effects.
I had the wealthiest because I thought people that kind of already like were set up with resources, maybe better networks, might be able to build more established businesses drawing on their own assets.
Yeah, I think that would be my prediction also, but also because poorer households might need to use that, initial seed capital for immediate consumption, might not be able to invest it as effectively And so, 2 years down the road, might not see as much of an impact on consumption, but let's take a look. Oh.
The fifth quintile is the
Wealthiest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, see that at the top. Yeah.
Surprising.
Yeah. They actually did better on consumption.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's actually surprising. Yeah.
All the results are surprising. I mean, this whole graph is surprising. I don't know why.
The second wealthiest are doing pretty well.
Yeah, I'll have to look at how big the difference is between these. There actually was quite a large range of PPI scores at baseline for households. So I think there is some difference between the quintiles, but we'll need to probably add to this graph like exactly what the PPI score range was for each quintile.
I'm
It's
actually
interesting though, sorry.
sorry. I'm saying I'm surprised and impressed that the lowest quintile would actually, do more of investments in net assets than consumption.
Yeah, and I was going to say precisely that about the richest one, like how they, I mean, even though like the confidence intervals are large, but still like how they seem to not be spending a lot into, well, investing into assets, which is surprising.
Again, I think seeing that by head of household might help.
Yeah, I'm taking some notes, but hopefully others are too. I think, yeah, all of these ideas we need to follow up with some supplementary analysis. Great. Any other comments on this before we go to the last subgroup? Okay, so the last subgroup was looking at whether treatment effects varied by whether a member of the household at baseline reported having a chronic disability. And this again comes from Village Enterprise data. So the definition of disability, we'd have to get from them unless someone on the call knows. But before we do that, we'll do a prediction, last prediction. Oops. Some people were sure of their answer. You even could have read the question that quickly. Okay. All right, 5 more seconds. Okay, absolutely. Well, little consensus, I guess. More on the side of households without a disabled member would have slightly to moderately larger treatment effects, though 2 people disagreed with that. Any comments on the or rationale? Anybody want to give a theory?
I just didn't have it. I was like, I don't see a theory. That's why I said no. No difference.
Christy or Nisha, could you give a little bit of context for why this was a subgroup of particular importance to Village Enterprise?
It wasn't for Village Enterprise so much. It was more for DFID, because DFID has a it's obligated to kind of share numbers on the number of disabled beneficiaries that they're reaching. And then so separately, I think Village Enterprise is reporting to them the numbers of people that they've reached with their program that have disabilities. And then there was also just an interest in understanding like how, if they are affected differently.
Yeah. I was surprised by the data, just how many households had a member with a chronic disability. So almost 50% of households in our sample.
Yeah, and I think your question of how it's defined, I think the question was, does someone in your household have have a chronic disability, and there might have been one other clarifying phrase on how it's affected them, but it was self-reported.
All right, so let's take a look at the results. Still running, all right. Did you say makes sense, Christy? What makes sense?
Well, I mean, I just didn't really see the theory of change here because we're not talking about the respondent. We're just talking about some member in the household reporting that they have a chronic disability. So I just didn't really see kind of the link for how the intervention was specifically help them more or less.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. There's a huge difference between like, you know, a grandparent who's supported by the household and those of the household having a disability versus like a parent or someone who otherwise would be a wage earner.
Is there even any question about getting funding for some qualitative follow-up to try to explore some certain point with qual data as well? Jeff is like, no,
I'm not answering that.
Please, no.
Frida can answer that question.
Sorry, I missed the question. What was the question, Kafan?
Are we planning that there could be some discussions around some follow-up with some qualitative survey work to explore certain theories that we can't necessarily explore very well with quant, with data? Different.
I think we are completely over, but I mean,
yeah, I know that, Frida, but like from some other source, you know, I know that I've been in your shoes before, Frida. and others before me. So we all know.
I know we talked about this, I think, earlier, and just, you know, just noted that the lack of budget. I mean, I'm quite interested to hear what the rest think. If we could get it would be interesting to explore some of this, but only if there's funding, but also we need to align on what we think is most useful. Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to stop the recording now, by the way. And I'll just cut off this last part about